So in order to understand that, we first must talk about the mind. In Buddhism, we do not look at what we call the mind the same way as in generally in science or in a general sense when we say the word mind. Actually, most people these days, when we talk about the word mind, they think of the brain. They think of the brain. So when you hear about the research about meditation, people mostly talk about the brain, how meditation has helped to improve the brain, the functioning of the brain. And you may have even seen it will take a while. I think the battery just ran out before I got on the stage, so it has to restart. So when we are meditating, we might think of that. We might have seen the images of the monks that are wearing electrodes, what do you call them? Electrodes, right? On their head in the research. You have seen that perhaps. It's been sort of images that have gone all over the world. And there's even been several articles talking about one particular French monk ordained in the Tibetan tradition. Have you heard about him? His name was Mathieu Ricard, and he was called the happiest man in the world because in some articles it was proven that his brain had been changed because of meditation, and it turned out it was a very happy brain. It was a very happy brain. But actually, in Buddhism, we tend to look at meditation a little deeper than just the brain. Actually, not even within science, there is always consensus about whether the mind is actually the brain. Some scientists say that the mind may be more than just the brain. Some scientists say that the mind may not fully, what we feel, what we think may not be fully reflected in the brain. That means that there must be other ways that we have not understood yet. That means that there must be more than just what can be explained by the physical part. There is also research to talk about a bit of a heavy topic, talk about near-death experiences, or when you talk about, even some research is pretty far-fetched. For example, there was one researcher, one scientist called Norberg, and he was actually pretty well accepted in the scientific community. He even received a Nobel Prize for his work. And he actually wrote one article in the 50s saying, do we really need a brain? And that was supposed to be controversial to stir people up. He didn't actually believe that we do not need a brain. He didn't believe that. He was asking people because he had done research actually proving that, did you ever hear about hydrocephalus patients? Hydrocephalus is a disease that these days mostly exists in so-called undeveloped countries, which means that from birth, due to some defect, there is too much fluid in the brain, in the head, causing the brain not to fully grow. These people, when you do a scan, they have only a bit of brain tissue. And in the past, in the West, this disease was not controlled yet. So it happened that some people were born with this disease and had not much brain. It turned out after he did this research that a lot of these people actually were leading very normal lives. They had a family, they had a successful or reasonably successful job. They were not retarded, they didn't have any problems with their small brain. Some of these people, if you see the scans, they hardly have any brain, which makes you wonder, like Norberg said, do we really need a brain? Maybe we have been thinking about what is the mind in the wrong way. So in Buddhism we say that actually the mind is... there's one more thing. They do say that when they looked at the scan with little brain, they did say that he was working as a civil servant. that had to be mentioned as well. I mean, I think that was not related to the article actually. Anyway, I don't think that's very fair. The point was that actually these people were not retarded. They were very healthy, and also people who were successful in their jobs as a father, which means that there's a lot we do not know about the brain. And because of that, it's important to look deeper. When we look at the Buddhist teachings about the mind, the Buddha used one important word. He said the mind is actually apart from the body. And Lompo Apatnam, our meditation teacher, about who you must have heard already a little bit, and this meditation teacher from Thailand, he said that actually our mind is like a sphere, and those who can meditate very deeply, they can actually see their own mind. And it exists within our body. But very often, our mindfulness or our attention is wandering, which creates some problems. That is what I would like to talk about today, and how meditation is actually dealing with that problem. Let me see. But first, let me just switch on a small video, a report that was done. This one is pretty fast, but I'll just emphasize the contents of it. Let me see if I can switch this on. Oh, I don't think so. Hold on. No, that's okay. It's just that I didn't insert it yet. Oh. My fault. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Maybe you should ask someone to check. I think the channel is wrong. It's not supposed to be PC, I think. Maybe. Okay, never mind that. I'll just switch it all on, and as soon as we're ready, we can start looking at some images which will help us to understand. So, so there is actually an interesting article come up. I could just continue, but I think sometimes a news report or something like that can help us relate to what I'm telling. So I know this is pretty sensational, but pretty fast, but actually it is a very good report. Let me just switch that on. Okay. Hold on. Here's the volume. This is a report on American television about a scientific study that was done.
Does your mind have a tendency to wander sometimes? It does. Happens to everybody, it's human nature. Turns out most of us, when we're doing one thing, we're often thinking about something else. Now there's this new study out of Harvard that says our wandering minds actually make us unhappy.
Where did
lived in the present moment?
Have you never lived in the moment?
I live in the moment.
Deeply embrace this moment.
According to this new study from Harvard, the gurus are right. The study authors created an app for the iPhone, which, by the way, is a great device for distraction. They contacted 2,250 people through their iPhones at random moments throughout the day and asked 3 questions. 1, how are you feeling right now on a scale of 0 to 100? 2, what are you doing right now? And 3, are you thinking about something other than what you're doing? They found that people's minds were wandering 46.9% of the time, except it should be noted during lovemaking, and that people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were present and attentive.
A lot of the time when people are mind wandering, they're thinking about unpleasant things, worrying about the future, ruminating on something from the past, and that has an enormously negative relationship to their happiness.
I mean, let's admit it, we all do it. In fact, while I've been recording this story, I've been thinking about what I had during my last meal, what I should have had during my last meal, and my adorable 2-year-old niece, Tammy. It is a unique ability we humans have. Our brains allow us to spend a lot of time thinking about the future and reflecting on the past. But the study authors say while this evolutionary leap has allowed us to build skyscrapers and the internet, it also comes at an emotional cost.
Fascinating, and you are also saying there are some other tips as to how we focus on the moment that they're going to be studying now.
The frustrating part of the study is they don't actually make any recommendations about how you can stay in the moment. They say that's what they're going to study next. But it is a big problem. There's a great Mark Twain quote. He said, some of the worst things in my life never even happened. We just project forward into the future with concern all the time.
It's very fast, but it actually makes very clear, good points. And this man was the author of the study, or the one who led the study. Also did a talk about it. I think it's on TED Talk, and it's a very interesting study. And actually, it very much comes down to how do we deal with our own mind in such a way that we can be happy, whatever the circumstances. It's interesting that what he says basically is that even if you are working as in a factory and you feel very bored with your work, standing, doing the same thing repetitively every day, actually that is not really a factor of happiness or suffering at all. What he's saying is whatever you're doing, wherever you are, if your mind is in the present and is in the here and now, then you are happy. And that's a very interesting point. It's also interesting because it's been often said by many of the many so-called gurus or many authors talking about mindfulness, but it's never been proven in a scientific way. And now, once it's proven, of course, it leads people to think more about it. The Buddha, he would use a word saying that our mind has a tendency to drift off far and to wander alone. He used that word, he said our mind is wandering alone. And that he meant that our mind, when it tends to wander all the time, trying to find some delight, here and there, to find some sort of superficial happiness. But when it wanders alone all the time. Let me just explain that in a moment. By a quote from actually a French philosopher, Blaise Pascal, he said something pretty pessimistic if you read this. Distraction is the only thing that consoles us for our miseries, and yet it is itself the greatest of our miseries. He was not a very optimistic person. Anyway, he did point out what is the problem. He didn't mention how we can solve it. I don't think he did, actually. But the Buddha actually goes a little farther than just mentioning the problem. He said our mind is wandering, but it also wanders alone. What does that mean? That means that when it wanders, it tends to go at one thing at the same time. Now let me explain that first. According to Buddhist psychology, when we wonder, it's not just our thoughts that come up, but it's actually because our mind is actually something that is subtle, but it's not the same as our brain. It can actually move, and when it moves, it tends to go to whatever we are thinking about. So if we are thinking about our home, then our mind will go to our home. If we are thinking about our loved ones, then our mind will go to our loved ones. So it tends to travel all the time. This is rather difficult to imagine. But because of that, the traveling, we tend to attach to certain things. Sometimes we want something very bad. You'd like to have a new car, but we don't have the money for it, so we feel unhappy. Or some people have a very stable relationship, have been married for a long time, but they have someone they meet on their work. Actually, they know the relationship is not going to make them happy, but they feel distracted because of that. And they feel that marriage may have a problem with them. And other people, they're very angry with someone. They're very angry with someone and they cannot sleep because of that anger. The person that they're angry with is already sleeping very fine, but they cannot sleep because they're thinking about that person all the time. In such cases, our mind is actually not here. If you really look at your mind deeply at such a moment, which is usually very hard, then your mind is actually not here all the time. It's not here. When you close your eyes and meditate, you might even notice that you're thinking 1,000 things, but it just seems that your mind is not here. But when we think 1,000 things, and our mind goes outside, tends to attach itself to certain things, then actually we still wander alone. And what did the Buddha mean by that mysterious word? He meant that when we are thinking about something, we do think about one thing at a time. But because we think so fast, we tend not to notice that. We think 1,000 things at the same time. But actually we do think one thing at the same time. For example, if you are asked to do one thing with your right hand and at the same time do something with your left hand, you find that hard to do. This is the nature of our mind. We do one thing at the same time, but because we are thinking so much, we do not notice that. What does that mean? That means that when our mind wanders, it goes to one thing at the same time, and we can choose what thing. If we think about something positive, and we bring our mind inside, we bring our mind inside, we let our mind rest at peace, then that is one choice. The other choice is that we just let our mind continue to think about, ruminate about the past, or think about something bad that makes us angry or something like that. Is another choice. We can choose where to devote our attention. So this is the point of what the Buddha is saying when he's saying the mind wanders alone. So when it wanders alone, we can actually choose where it wanders, although that is of course also a practice. So the good news about our mind, apart from that it wanders a lot and that we seem to suffer because of that, is there is also a good news. The Buddha actually did mention as well that our mind is luminous. It is bright and clear by its own nature. You could call it in English self-radiant. It is luminous by itself. But this clarity, this luminosity, this brightness inside, we have lost. Because our mind, once we think about things, we meet people, we meet situations, events, we tend to respond to certain events. then our mind starts to develop certain habits or patterns, and we start to have certain dust coming in our mind, and our mind loses its brightness. We tend to lose the connection with that brightness within. That's why we do not know that we have this potential within to rediscover this brightness within. Brightness, with that I don't mean like brightness as in intelligent, just intelligent or something like that. Actually, I mean that there is a certain wisdom, clarity, and wholeness hidden in every person. But this wisdom, clarity, and wholeness within, we are not seeing that, we are not touching that, because we have certain things in our mind which I just call dust. Technical word for it in Buddhism is defilement. This, in Buddhism, we compare just like rust. You know, you could have a very strong metal, which even the strongest of animals cannot bite through. But if you have a bit of rust on it, then it can get fully eroded. The metal can get fully damaged because of that rust. The same way our mind, if it has rust inside, then the actual potential that we have, the potential to feel happy, to feel good, to work, for the mind to work, to function well, actually gets lost, gets less. Because of that rust. Now what do I mean by rust? What do I mean by rust? These are three, what we call defilements, or you could say types of rust inside our mind. Once our mind starts to wander, we start to want certain things which makes us unhappy. If it's something that's beyond what we really need, then our mind sometimes becomes unhappy because of that. Or we hate something, we hate someone, then we become unhappy. Sometimes it's not like we hate it or we like it, but we are confused about something. We feel stressed about something. Or we feel we do not really understand something clear, we do not really. Sometimes we see something as a problem, well, it's not really a problem. Or sometimes there is really a problem and we do not see it, we do not acknowledge that. That is delusion. Delusion not like a mental illness, but delusion as a form of subtle rust in our mind. And these three, actually, they come up as soon as our mind starts to wander. When our mind wanders, then it's just like you have the same thing as, have you ever seen one of those snowballs which you buy in a souvenir shop, which has maybe some mountain or some couple dancing in it, and when you shake it, the snow will come in, snowball, it will stir up, and you cannot really actually see the image inside. But once you put the snowball down in a still spot, the snow will start to sink down, and you can actually see what image is inside. The same way with our mind. Normally, because our mind is wandering all the time, it becomes, we lose our peace, and actually these kind of habits come up. Greed, hatred, delusion come up in our mind. But as soon as we learn to still the mind in one single spot, it becomes possible for our mind to become more peaceful and clear, and we start to see things as they really are. We start to see things, start to see what is beneficial for us, what is beneficial for other people, how to do things in the right way. do this. So, actually in Buddhism, this is how we define mental health, or how we understand the meaning of the clarity of mind. So the mind becomes clear as soon as we start to learn to deal with that rust inside, starting by stilling the mind. When our mind becomes still, the rust will sink down and becomes less powerful in our mind. And this is what you could call mental health, or mental resilience, strength of mind. Some people think, when they think of mental health, they think of someone who has no mental illness. Just that when you have no mental illness, then you are mentally healthy. You don't need to do anything for that. Just make sure you don't have any mental illness. You don't get so stressed if you get a mental illness. But if you look at the World Health Organization, it actually goes a little farther than that. The World Health Organization says that mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now when I read that definition for the first time, it seems, oh, it's nice, but actually it doesn't really say anything about our mind. It just says how someone with a healthy mind would act. It's just like saying, well, what is a person who is very patient and not easily angered? Well, he usually doesn't scold at people when something happens, or his face tends not to go red or something, but you don't actually know what anger is, or how to deal with anger. The same way, this definition actually doesn't really talk about mental health. So mental health in Buddhism is actually defined as right concentration. Right concentration is the original word for what these days we call meditation. So here we are with our answer of today, what is meditation, or why do we meditate? Well, to find mental health and resilience inside ourselves, to build up mental health and resilience and strength within us. So right concentration, the word in Pali or in the ancient Indian language, is Samma Samadhi. Samma Samadhi, this word Samadhi, if some of you have followed some yoga classes, you might have come across this word as well, because it's also used in the Yoga Sutras. This is the word used for meditation in the ancient Indian tradition. When the mind is still and unwaveringly stable at the center of the body, it becomes subtle. The structure of the mind actually changes. It becomes soft and bright. So when I just mentioned earlier about when they scanned the brain and figured out that our brain was going to change when we meditate, this is actually not just the brain, it's actually the whole mind. And the brain responds to that. The mind, the whole system of our being, it changes because as soon as we bring the mind to one single spot. Because this is the nature of how, as a human being, this is the most natural way of being, that we are with our mind at one single spot. But because we have lost contact with that very natural way of being, we do not notice that. So หลวงปู่ปากน้ำ sorry. So หลวงปู่ปากน้ำ he used the word stand still, or stillness, as a definition of what what is the key of meditation. He actually said that meditation, calm meditation. What is meditation? He said, stand still. That is meditation. The more the mind is practiced, the more still it becomes, And also, as a result, you feel better, you feel more cheerful and happy. It becomes more easier to do something. When you have some work to do, you find it more easier to apply your mind. This is what is called in Buddhist text. It becomes malleable and wieldy. The mind becomes wieldy, just like metal that is melted. You can cast it in any form. Or just like clay which is warm, you can easily mold it into any form. And the mind gains a certain stability. It's not easily so much affected by the things around us. Why is that? Because the mind has you could say the mind has some food in itself. When you're meditating, and we will meditate more today and tomorrow, you will find that there is a part of meditation that actually gives you some food, you feel like you've gained something from inside, which makes it less necessary to look around us all the time for nutrition, and for stimuli, to find happiness outside of us. These are also some metaphors that are used for the mind that is trained through meditation. It's just like we have paid our debts, or it's just like we recovered from some illness. It's just like we are free from prison or free from slavery. Or just like we are after having embarked on a dangerous journey, we have arrived. You know, sometimes when you have finished something that is very stressful, like when you're applying for a job, you feel very stressful about the job interview, and then after the job interview you feel it's gone well, you feel satisfied about it, you feel relieved. Or when you are a student and you have to do some exam, as soon as you finish the exam you feel relieved. Why is that? Because there is some rust, some concerns, some negative patterns in our mind that suddenly stop. It suddenly disappear. And because of that we feel relieved. But after a while, then our mind starts to connect with new concerns and new worries. It would be great if we could just stay with that feeling of relief, that openness, that feeling of being relaxed. But by nature, our mind starts to look for new things to ruminate and think about. So when we train our mind, we also train our mind in meditation to do that less, to have that tendency to find things to worry about, to have that tendency less. So this is briefly about the nature of the mind. I think actually the topic of today is happiness, as I already mentioned. This is actually what meditation is about, mental health, happiness, which is a different kind of happiness than the superficial happiness we find in our daily life. So, just to give you a brief idea about what meditation is. So why do we have all these techniques, like imagining something, using a mantra sometimes, all these different techniques that we are introducing is for you to practice the mind to be in one single spot. That is the purpose of Dhammakaya meditation, as it was formulated, as it was described by Lopua. And once we learn that skill, you'll find that that is the most fulfilling skill ever to learn. You actually can learn for the mind to be really concentrated in a natural and healthy way, and you can use that in your daily life in many ways. These days there is a sort of fashion or trend to talk a lot about mindfulness, and many books have been published all the way from topics like mindfully walking to mindfully eating, mindfully doing some job, or mindfully shooting arrows, or anything that is concerned with mindfulness. There all have been books written about it. Some American politician actually wrote a book about how to mindfully revive the American spirit with mindfulness. I mean, it's really a word that is used in every possible occasion, and anyone who would like to, try to get the spiritual dimension in whatever they're talking about. But the key to mindfulness is like that, is this, that we are preparing our mind to become still, to learn, to just be free and independent of all that distraction, all that rust, and all that negativity. And this is very important. So I'd like to finish with that brief idea about what meditation in our tradition is about. Do you have any questions for now about this topic? Yes. Mm-hmm.
I like multiple things at one time.
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, I suppose, fix one thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I do fix one thing, whether it's meditation or anything, which sort of makes me focus on a particular task, and that's not just meditation, anything in my life. I find my mind just turns off.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned actually the tiredness of your mind. I just find that I like being active, I like keeping the mind active. But sometimes by not keeping active and by stilling the mind, the result for me is obviously tiredness or sleepiness sort of sets in. How do you strengthen that muscle? How do you strengthen that sort of ability to not get bored and not sort of yawn and fidget?
Mm-hmm.
The distraction is always to do something else. So maybe sort of helping those out.
You can also look at it this way. Stilling the mind doesn't necessarily have to look at it. You do not necessarily have to look at it as something passive. Although that seems to be the most common way to think about it. But what we are doing in the practice of meditation is not exactly nothing. Although usually some people might describe meditation as like that, just do nothing. But actually we do not do nothing. We bring the mind to a focus. But it's a different focus than in our daily life. Usually in our daily life we tend to focus outside. And when we think of concentration or being active, it's usually with an external focus. We need stimuli, we need something outside of us to keep us active. But when in meditation we actually learn to receive this energy from an inner focus, to gain this energy from an inner focus. So in meditation can actually be very, invigorating, can give you a very good energy. Why? Because there's actually something, I wouldn't say depressing, but for the mind always to have to go look for stimuli outside is very against its nature. We are so used to it that we think this is our nature, but actually it's very much against human nature. Human nature is actually for the mind to be within. So when we are meditating, to make it very practical, it's very much okay to use certain means to keep the mind active, but we just keep the mind active within. We use a mantra, we may use some visualization, and we can do this throughout our life, not just when we close our eyes. Some people even meditate with the eyes open, in fact, talking about the eyes. So it's perfectly okay to think of meditation as something active. But the feeling of fulfillment comes from within. It doesn't come from outside of us. That's the difference. So you learn to meditate, you let go of one form of being active, but you develop another form. So in the beginning it may look like being passive, but after a while you find that you gain a new form of being active. Sort of energy that is always there without you having to find stimuli all the time around you. Yes, this is something everyone can learn.